The glass shattered against the stone floor before the toast even finished. Every head in the great hall turned toward the sound, but Alpha King Damian Cross did not flinch. He stood at the head of the long table with a silver cup raised high, his dark eyes fixed on nothing at all, while 300 pack members waited for him to speak the words that would bind him to a woman he did not love. "To the union of two great packs," he said, his voice steady, even though his hand was not. "To Seraphina." The hall erupted in applause. Horns of mead clashed together. Somewhere near the back, an old woman wept with joy, believing she was witnessing the beginning of a golden age for the cross pack. Seraphina, seated beside him in a gown the color of fresh blood, smiled with the practiced grace of someone who had been trained since birth to smile at exactly this moment. But Damian felt nothing. He drank from the cup anyway, because a king who hesitated in front of his people was a king who invited doubt, and doubt was the one thing an alpha could never afford to show. The wolf beneath his skin, the ancient and restless part of him that had once howled for a woman named Elena 3 years ago, stayed silent now. It had been silent for so long that Damian sometimes wondered if it had died completely, buried under the weight of duty and the crown his father had left him too soon. He did not know that 300 miles to the north, in a small house at the edge of a forest that belonged to no pack, his silence had a reason. He did not know that the wolf inside him remained quiet, not because it was dead, but because the other half of its soul was somewhere else entirely, breathing softly in the dark, unaware that this very night, under a different roof, her son had just turned 3 years old. Elena stood in the doorway of a small bedroom, watching her son sleep. The candle beside his bed had burned low, throwing shadows across a room that held nothing extravagant. A wooden toy wolf carved by a neighbor, a patchwork quilt sewn from old scraps of fabric, a window with a broken latch that she had meant to fix for months but never found the time. Kaylin's chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of a child's dreamless sleep, but there was nothing ordinary about the boy behind those closed eyes. Elena had noticed it for weeks now, the way his small body seemed to grow faster than any child should, the way his eyes sometimes flashed gold in candlelight when he was startled, the way he had once lifted a chair meant for a grown man, without any strain at all, and then looked at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. She had told herself it meant nothing. She had told herself this for 3 years, ever since the night she left the cross-pack lands with nothing but a bag of clothes, and a secret growing inside her, that she had not yet understood herself. But denial had a limit, and Elena had reached hers. Her son was not an ordinary wolf child. He was the son of an alpha king, and power like that did not stay hidden forever. She pulled the door closed gently, and walked to the small kitchen, where a single candle burned on the table beside a cup of tea gone cold. She sat down, wrapping her arms around herself, and let her mind drift back to a memory she usually forced away. 3 years ago, she had stood in a courtyard, much like the one where Damian now celebrated his engagement, except then the ceremony had been for rejection instead of union. She remembered the exact words. "I, Damian Cross, reject Elena Hart as my fated mate." The formal words a Luna candidate feared most, spoken in front of an entire pack, spoken by the one person whose bond should have made rejection impossible to bear, yet he had said them anyway, believing that a king, built on the softness of a mate bond, would never survive the wars that were coming. He had believed the bond made him weak. He had never once considered that walking away from it might make him weaker still. Elena had not cried in front of anyone that night. She had smiled, thanked the pack for their hospitality, and walked out of the territory with her head high, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her break. It was only when she was 2 days into the forest, alone and shivering beneath a canopy of pine trees, that she allowed herself to fall apart completely. She never told him about the child. There had been no time before she left, and after, pride and fear had sealed her lips, just as tightly as his rejection had sealed her fate. A rejected mate carrying the air of an alpha king was not safe information to give away. Packs had gone to war over smaller secrets. Councils had turned against mothers for less. She told herself she was protecting her son by staying silent, and for 3 years, that had been enough. But now Kaylin's wolf was waking early, showing strength that should not exist in a child so young, and Elena understood with a cold and sudden certainty that hiding was no longer a choice she could make alone. Somewhere out there, other packs would notice a scent like his eventually. Rogue hunters who tracked unclaimed bloodlines for profit or fear would notice a scent like his eventually, and when they did, a small house at the edge of an unclaimed forest would offer no protection at all. She stood from the table and walked to the window, staring out at the dark line of trees beyond her small garden. Somewhere far to the south, under torchlight and celebration, the father of her child was pledging himself to another woman, completely unaware that his blood ran through a small boy sleeping only a few rooms away. Elena pressed her palm against the cold glass and whispered words she had not allowed herself to say aloud in years. He should know. But even as she said it, fear closed around the thought like a fist. Returning meant walking back into a world that had cast her out once already. It meant facing a man who had chosen his crown over her heart. It meant risking Kaylin's safety in a pack whose counsel had never approved of her from the very beginning. She turned from the window and walked back toward her son's room, needing to see him breathe just one more time before she allowed herself to sleep. As she reached the doorway, a sound broke the stillness of the night, sharp and unfamiliar, coming from somewhere deep in the trees beyond her garden. It was not the call of any animal she recognized. It was low, deliberate, and disciplined, the kind of sound made by something that wanted to be heard by only one set of ears. Elena's blood went cold. She had lived at the edge of this forest for 3 years without a single incident, without a single visitor, without a single hint that anyone in the wider world of packs and politics knew she existed at all. That silence had been her shield. Tonight, for the first time, the silence had broken. She moved quickly and quietly to Kaylin's room, gathering him into her arms without waking him fully. He stirred, murmuring something soft against her shoulder, and she held him tighter, feeling the unnatural warmth radiating from his small body, warmth that had grown steadily stronger over the past several weeks. Outside, the sound came again, closer this time. Elena carried her son to the small hidden space behind the kitchen pantry, a space she had built the very first month she arrived, back when fear had still felt like an unnecessary precaution rather than a daily companion. She had told herself back then that she was being overly careful, that no one would ever come looking for a woman who had disappeared so completely. She had been wrong. She settled Kaylin into the small space, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead, and whispered for him to stay quiet no matter what he heard. His eyes fluttered open for just a moment, gold flashing beneath sleepy lashes, and he nodded before drifting back into sleep, trusting his mother, the way only a child could. Elena closed the pantry door and turned to face whatever waited outside, her own wolf rising beneath her skin for the first time in months, sharp and alert, and ready to defend the only thing in this world that mattered to her anymore. Far to the south, the celebration in the great hall stretched late into the night. Damien excused himself from the festivities earlier than protocol required, citing exhaustion, though exhaustion had little to do with it. He walked alone through the stone corridors of his family estate, past portraits of ancestors who had ruled before him, past the closed doors of a council chamber, where decisions about his future were made without his full consent, more often than he liked to admit. He stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the training grounds below, empty now except for torches burning in iron holders along the walls. The night air was cool against his skin, and for a moment, he allowed himself the rare comfort of simply existing without an audience. His wolf stirred faintly, a small movement he had not felt in longer than he cared to remember. It was not strong enough to be called a pull, not clear enough to be called a message, but it was there, a faint whisper of something once familiar, gone as quickly as it came. Damien gripped the stone railing and closed his eyes, telling himself it was nothing. Fatigue, wine, the stress of a wedding he had not truly chosen to want. He told himself this the way he had told himself many things over the past 3 years, repeating the words until they almost felt true. But somewhere in the deepest part of him, in the place where instinct lived beneath duty, a single thought rose unbidden and refused to leave. Something has changed tonight. He did not know what it meant. He did not know that 300 miles away, a woman he had once rejected was standing in her kitchen with her wolf rising to meet a threat in the darkness, or that his son, the heir he did not know existed, was hidden behind a pantry wall, with gold eyes wide open in the dark, listening to his mother's heartbeat, as the only sound that made sense in a night that had suddenly turned dangerous. Damien only knew that something inside him, something he thought he had buried 3 years ago, had woken up. And it felt afraid. The scream that tore through the small house was not Elena's. It came from the trees themselves, or so it seemed for one terrifying heartbeat, before Elena realized the sound belonged to a man who had just stepped into her garden and found her waiting for him with her eyes glowing amber in the dark. He staggered back, clutching his shoulder where her claws had caught him the instant he crossed onto her land, and Elena stood tall in front of her home, chest heaving, teeth bared in warning. "You should not have come here," she said, her voice low and dangerous. There were 3 of them. She counted quickly, the way survival had trained her to count over the last 3 years. One stood near the tree line, favoring the shoulder she had wounded. Another circled slowly to her left, broad and silent, watching her with the calculating patience of someone paid to finish a job rather than start a fight. The third remained furthest back, cloaked, giving orders in a voice too quiet for Elena to make out clearly. "We only want the boy," the wounded one said, still gripping his shoulder. "Hand him over, and you can walk away untouched." Elena's blood ran cold, but she did not let it show on her face. They knew about Kaelin. Somehow, after 3 years of careful hiding, someone had found them, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. "There is no boy here," she said. "You have the wrong house." The cloaked figure at the back laughed softly, a sound with no warmth in it at all. Every wolf within 50 miles felt that shift in power tonight. A child's wolf does not wake that strong without a bloodline behind it. "We know who fathered him, Elena Hart. The only question is whether you hand him over quietly, or whether we take him after breaking every bone in your body first." Fear and fury rose together inside her, twin flames feeding the same fire. She had spent 3 years building walls around her son, and now those walls had been found in a single night. There was no more room for pretending. There was only the fight in front of her, and the desperate need to survive it long enough to protect the small boy hidden behind her pantry wall. She shifted before they could finish speaking, her body folding into the shape of a silver-gray wolf, larger and faster than her human form ever suggested she could be. The wounded man barely had time to react before she closed the distance and struck, driving him back into the tree line with a force that cracked branches above their heads. The second man moved in from her flank, teeth flashing in the moonlight, and Elena twisted just enough to avoid his full weight while taking a shallow cut along her side. Pain flared bright and sharp, but she did not slow down. She could not slow down. Somewhere behind her, in the safety of a wooden pantry wall, her son's life depended entirely on how long she could keep these men occupied outside. The fight stretched across her small garden, crushing what little she had managed to grow that season, uprooting the fence she had built with her own hands during her first lonely spring in this house. She fought with everything she had, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she still carried, thinking of nothing but the small warm weight of her son, sleeping just a few feet away. But 3 against 1, even with desperation on her side, was not a fight she could win forever. The wounded man recovered enough to circle back, and the second attacker pressed harder, driving her steadily backward toward the house itself. Elena felt her strength beginning to fade, felt the sharp burn of exhaustion creeping into muscles that had already given everything they had. She stumbled once, catching herself against the corner of the house, and in that single moment of weakness, the second attacker lunged. A shout rang out from the tree line, sudden and commanding, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Enough! Fall back, now." The attackers froze instantly, obedience bred into them by whatever fear or loyalty controlled their actions. The cloaked figure at the back of the group stepped forward slightly, though still keeping enough distance to remain hidden in shadow. "You fight well for someone hiding in the middle of nowhere," the figure said, voice smooth and unreadable. "But this was only a first look, Elena Hart. We know where you are now. We know what your son is. Next time, we will not come with only 3. The 3 men retreated into the trees as quickly and silently as they had arrived, leaving Elena standing alone in the wreckage of her garden, blood dripping from the cut along her side, chest heaving with exertion and terror in equal measure. She stood frozen for several long seconds, waiting to be certain they were truly gone, before her legs finally gave out beneath her, and she collapsed onto the cold ground. She did not allow herself to rest for long. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to check on Kaelin, to prepare for the possibility that the men would return before dawn. She dragged herself upright, shifted back into her human form despite the pain it caused, and staggered toward the house. Kaelin was exactly where she had left him, wide awake now, gold eyes fixed on the pantry door, with an intensity no 3-year-old should possess. When Elena opened the small hidden space, he threw himself into her arms without a single word, his small body trembling. "It is over," she whispered into his hair, though she knew the words were only partially true. "It is over for tonight." She held him for a long time, rocking gently, ignoring the sting of her wound, ignoring the exhaustion pulling at every part of her body. When Kalen finally calmed enough to speak, his voice was small and uncertain, in a way that broke her heart completely. "Why do they want me, Mama?" Elena closed her eyes, searching for words that could explain 3 years of secrets to a child who deserved better than half-truths, yet needed protection more than he needed complete honesty tonight. "Because you are special," she said finally, "and sometimes, special things attract people who should not be trusted." It was not enough of an answer, and she knew it, but it was all she could offer in the wreckage of that terrible night. She carried him to her own bed, rather than his, unwilling to let him out of arm's reach, and sat awake against the headboard long after his breathing evened into sleep, staring at the shadows near the window, waiting for any sign that the men might return. They did not come back that night, but Elena understood with complete certainty that her hiding was finished. The wounded man's words echoed in her mind over and over. "We know where you are now. We know what your son is." There was only one place left where Kalen might find real protection, one place with walls strong enough and warriors skilled enough to stand against whoever hunted them next. It was the very place she had fled 3 years ago with a broken heart and a secret she had sworn never to reveal. The Cross-Pack territory, the home of the Alpha King who did not know he had a son. By the time the sun rose over the tree line, casting soft gold light across a garden torn apart by conflict, Elena had already made her decision, even though every part of her still recoiled from it. She would not walk into that territory as the woman who had once been rejected, begging for mercy. She would walk in as a mother protecting her child, and she would demand the protection her son deserved, whatever the cost to her own pride. She spent the morning packing what little they could carry, moving with the efficient calm of someone who had learned long ago how to survive on very little. Kalen watched her from the doorway of his room, unusually quiet, his small hands wrapped around the wooden toy wolf that had been his only comfort through the night. "Are we leaving, Mama?" he asked, as she folded the last of his clothes into a worn cloth bag. "Yes," Elena said, forcing steadiness into her voice, for his sake. "We are going somewhere safer." "Where?" Elena paused, her hands still on the bag, and looked at her son properly for the first time that morning. His eyes had returned to their normal soft brown, no trace of gold remaining, but she knew now that the gold would return, again and again, as his wolf continued to grow stronger than any child's wolf should. She thought of the man whose blood ran through those eyes, the man who had rejected her, without ever knowing what that rejection would cost him, and she felt a strange mixture of dread and determination settle over her. "To your father," she said quietly. "It is time he learned who you are." Kalen tilted his head, curiosity replacing some of the fear from the night before. "I have a father?" "Yes," Elena said, "and it is time he met you." She finished packing in silence after that, her mind already moving ahead to the long journey south, to the territory she had once called home, to the man whose engagement to another woman she had heard about only weeks earlier from a passing trader. She did not know how he would react to the truth she carried. She did not know whether he would welcome his son, or view the boy as nothing more than an inconvenient complication to whatever political marriage he had arranged for himself. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that staying hidden was no longer an option. The hunters had found them once. They would find them again, and next time, Elena might not survive long enough to protect her son at all. As they stepped out of the small house that had been their home for 3 quiet years, Elena took one last look at the garden, where she had fought for her son's life only hours earlier. Broken fence posts lay scattered across trampled earth, and dark stains marked the ground where her own blood had fallen. It was not a place she would miss, not truly, but it had kept them safe for a long time, and leaving it behind felt like closing a door on the only peace she had known since the night of her rejection. She took Kalen's small hand in hers, shouldered the bag containing everything they owned, and turned toward the road that led south, toward a kingdom ruled by a man who had once broken her heart without a second thought, completely unaware that the woman walking toward his territory now carried something that would change everything he believed about his own life. The road south was longer and harder than Elena remembered. 3 years ago, She had walked this same path in the opposite direction, running from a rejection so public and so cruel that she had barely felt the blisters forming on her feet or the hunger gnawing at her stomach. Now she walked it again, carrying a bag on one shoulder and holding her son's hand tightly with the other, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes to be certain no one followed. Kalen walked as much as his small legs allowed, though Elena carried him for long stretches when exhaustion overtook him. He did not complain, even when his feet grew sore and his eyes grew heavy with the need for proper sleep, a need that could not be fully satisfied while they kept moving through unfamiliar territory each night. There was something remarkable about his quiet endurance, something that reminded Elena painfully of the man whose blood he carried, a man who had always hidden his own struggles behind a mask of calm control. They traveled for 4 days, sleeping in whatever shelter they could find, avoiding the main roads where other packs might notice a woman and child traveling alone. Elena's wound from the fight in her garden had begun to heal, though it still ached with every sudden movement, a constant reminder of how close they had come to losing everything in a single terrible night. On the 3rd day, they encountered a small trading post nestled at the crossroads between 3 different pack territories, a neutral space where wolves from rival packs occasionally met to exchange goods without violence. Elena approached cautiously, keeping Kalen close behind her, scanning every face for signs of recognition or threat. An older woman ran the trading post, her silver hair tied back in a simple braid, her eyes sharp despite the wrinkles gathered around them. She studied Elena for a long moment, before her gaze drifted down to Kalen, and something shifted in her expression, a flicker of understanding that made Elena's stomach tighten with unease. "You are heading to cross territory," the woman said. It was not a question. Elena's hand instinctively moved to rest on Kalen's shoulder, pulling him slightly behind her. "We are simply passing through." The old woman smiled, though there was no malice in it, only a tired sort of knowing that came from decades of watching travelers pass through her small post, with secrets written plainly across their faces. "That boy has his eyes," she said quietly. "The Alpha King's eyes. I have seen them enough times myself, back when Damien Cross was still a boy running wild through these same crossroads with his father." Elena's throat tightened, but she did not deny it. There seemed little point in lying to someone who had already seen the truth so clearly. "Please," she said instead. "We need supplies, and we need no one to know we passed this way." The old woman studied her for another long moment, before nodding slowly. "I have kept many secrets in my time, child. Yours is safe with me." She moved behind her counter and began gathering bread, dried meat, and a small skin of water, setting them into a cloth bag without asking for payment. "But you should know something before you continue on that road." "What is that?" "The Alpha King's wedding is only weeks away now," the woman said, her voice gentler than before, as if she understood exactly what news like this might mean to a woman in Elena's position. "The whole territory speaks of nothing else. Serafina of the Ashford pack, a political match, they say, though the girl seems eager enough for the crown that will come with it." Elena absorbed the words without letting her expression change, though something painful twisted deep in her chest. She had known about the engagement already, had heard whispers of it weeks earlier, but hearing it confirmed so plainly, with a wedding date drawing near, made the reality of what she was walking toward feel suddenly much heavier. "Thank you for the warning," Elena said quietly, accepting the bag of supplies. "Whatever brings you to that territory," the old woman said, "I hope it is worth the risk you are clearly taking to get there." Elena glanced down at Kalen, who stood watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes, seemingly unaware of how much his existence had already begun reshaping the world around him. "It is," she said simply. "It is worth every risk." They left the trading post before nightfall, continuing south along a path that grew increasingly familiar as the miles passed. Elena recognized landmarks now, a twisted oak tree that marked the halfway point to the cross-territory border, a small stream where she had once stopped to rest during happier days, spent as a hopeful young woman anticipating a future that never came to pass. Each familiar sight brought with it a fresh wave of memory, some sweet, most bitter, all of them heavier now that she carried the living proof of everything that had happened between her and Damien all those years ago. On the 5th day, exhaustion finally caught up with both of them. Kalen's steps had slowed to almost nothing, his small face pale with the strain of travel, far beyond what any child his age should endure. Elena made the decision to rest properly for a full day, finding a small cave nestled into a rocky hillside where they could shelter safely without fear of discovery. It was there, while Kaelin slept curled against her side, that Elena allowed herself to think seriously about what awaited them at the end of this journey. She thought about Damien's face the last time she had seen it, cold and distant as he spoke the words that ended their bond in front of the entire pack. She thought about the council members who had never approved of her, who had whispered about her modest bloodline and lack of proper training, who had likely celebrated the moment Damien rejected her, as if it were a victory for the pack itself. She thought too about Seraphina, a woman she had never met, who would soon become Luna of the Cross pack through a marriage built on political convenience, rather than any true bond. Elena felt no anger toward this stranger, only a strange, hollow sympathy, knowing exactly what it felt like to stand beside Damien Cross and wonder whether his heart was truly present at all. But mostly, she thought about Kaelin, about the way his wolf had grown so quickly and so powerfully in recent months, about the hunters who had already found them once and would surely find them again if she did not secure real protection soon. Whatever pain waited for her in Cross territory, whatever humiliation or rejection Damien might offer when faced with the truth of his son's existence, none of it mattered as much as keeping Kaelin safe. She pressed a soft kiss to her son's forehead as he slept, feeling the steady warmth radiating from his small body, and made a silent promise that she intended to keep no matter what cost it demanded of her own heart. "Whatever happens," she whispered into the darkness of the cave, "I will make sure you are protected, even if it means facing him again." The following morning, they set out once more, the border of Cross territory now only a single day's travel away. Elena felt her nerves tightening with every mile, old wounds reopening as familiar scents began to reach her, scents of pine and stone and distant wood smoke that belonged unmistakably to the territory she had once called home. By late afternoon, they reached the outer boundary marker, a tall standing stone carved with the symbol of the Cross pack, an emblem Elena remembered tracing with her fingers during happier times, back when she had believed she would spend the rest of her life within these borders as Luna, beside the man she loved. Kaelin stopped beside her, staring up at the stone marker with wide eyes. "Is this where he lives? My father?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt inside. "This is his territory. Will he be happy to see me?" The question struck her harder than she expected, and for a moment, Elena struggled to find an honest answer that would not frighten her son or burden him with fears that belonged entirely to her own troubled heart. She knelt down to his level, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and forced a small, reassuring smile onto her face. "He will be surprised," she said carefully. "But I believe, once he understands, he will be very glad to know you." Kaelin nodded, accepting her words with the simple trust of a child who had no reason yet to doubt his mother's judgment. Elena straightened, took a steadying breath, and led her son past the standing stone and into the territory of the man who had broken her heart 3 years ago, unaware that he now carried a debt to her, far greater than any apology could ever repay. Somewhere ahead, beyond the hills and forests that made up the vast lands of the Cross pack, wedding preparations continued in full swing, oblivious to the small boy walking toward them with gold eyes and a father's blood running through every part of him. News of the attack in the northern forest reached Cross territory 3 days before Elena did, though no one there yet understood how closely it connected to their own future. Marcus, a retired warrior who had once served under Damien's father and now spent his days training younger pack members in the art of defense, heard the rumor first from a trader passing through the territory's main market. The trader spoke of a lone woman fighting off 3 armed attackers somewhere near the northern crossroads, defending what witnesses believed to be a child of unusual power. Marcus listened with only mild interest at first, the kind of attention one gives to distant gossip that seems unlikely to matter, until the trader mentioned a detail that made every hair on his arms rise with sudden alarm. "They say the boy has gold eyes," the trader said, lowering his voice, as though the words themselves carried danger. "Strong for his age. Some are saying he carries royal blood." Marcus said nothing in response, though his mind raced immediately toward a memory he had tried for 3 years to set aside. He remembered a young woman named Elena Hart, gentle and clever, who had once walked these very grounds as the presumed future Luna of the Cross pack, before everything fell apart in a single devastating ceremony. He remembered, too, the whispers that had followed her departure, Quiet rumors suggesting she might have left carrying more than a broken heart. Rumors that had been dismissed quickly by a council, eager to forget the entire embarrassing episode. Marcus had never fully believed those rumors were empty. Something about the timing, about the abruptness of Elena's disappearance, had always struck him as more significant than the council wanted to acknowledge. Now, hearing a traitor speak casually of a gold-eyed child defended fiercely by his mother somewhere north of the territory, old suspicions rose sharply back to the surface. He said nothing to anyone else that day, choosing instead to watch and wait, uncertain whether his instincts were leading him toward truth, or merely toward an old man's foolish hope for a story that had ended too sadly to have any hidden happy turn remaining. Meanwhile, within the walls of the Cross estate, preparations for the royal wedding continued, at a pace that left little room for anyone to notice small disturbances happening elsewhere in the territory. Seamstresses worked long hours finishing Serafina's wedding gown, an elaborate creation of silk and silver thread, meant to symbolize the joining of two powerful pack lineages. Kitchen staff planned menus extensive enough to feed thousands of guests expected to attend from every allied territory within 100 miles. Serafina herself moved through these preparations with practiced composure, though anyone paying close attention might have noticed the tightness around her eyes whenever Damien's name came up in conversation, the way her smile faltered slightly during moments when she believed no one was watching her closely. She had grown up understanding that marriages between powerful families rarely involved love, yet some small part of her had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that time and proximity might eventually grow something resembling genuine affection between herself and the Alpha King she was set to marry. That hope had not yet been realized, and with each passing day, Serafina found herself increasingly aware of a distance in Damien that no amount of careful courtship seemed able to close. She found him one evening standing alone in the estate's private garden, staring at nothing in particular, his expression unreadable in the fading evening light. She approached quietly, settling beside him on a stone bench, uncertain whether her presence would be welcomed or merely tolerated. "You seem distracted lately," she said carefully, watching his profile rather than meeting his eyes directly. Damien blinked, as though returning from somewhere far away, and offered her a small, practiced smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Wedding preparations require a great deal of attention. Forgive me if I seem distant." "It is not the wedding preparations distracting you," Serafina said quietly, her voice gentle but firm. "I have watched you carefully these past weeks, Damien. Something else occupies your thoughts." Damien did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting back toward the darkening sky beyond the garden walls. He thought of the strange restlessness that had gripped him since the night of their engagement toast, the faint stirring in his wolf that he could not fully explain, the persistent sense that something important had shifted somewhere beyond his awareness. He had dismissed it repeatedly as exhaustion or stress, yet the feeling refused to fade entirely, growing instead into a quiet, nagging unease that followed him through every waking hour. "It is nothing you need concern yourself with," he said finally, though the words felt hollow, even as he spoke them. Serafina studied him a moment longer before rising from the bench, disappointment evident in the careful stillness of her expression. "We are to be married in a matter of weeks, Damien. If there is something between us that cannot be shared honestly, I fear it will only grow larger with time, not smaller." She left him alone in the garden after that, her footsteps quiet against the stone path, and Damien remained seated long after she had gone, wrestling with feelings he could neither name nor dismiss. He told himself repeatedly that whatever restlessness troubled him had nothing to do with the past, nothing to do with a woman he had rejected 3 years ago for the good of his pack and his crown. He told himself this the way he had told himself many things since that difficult night, repeating the reasoning until it almost felt convincing. Yet even as he sat alone beneath a darkening sky, some small, stubborn part of him whispered that the feeling gripping his chest had everything to do with a choice he had made, long ago, and had never quite managed to forget. The following morning, Marcus requested a private audience with the Alpha King, a request unusual enough that Damien's personal guard hesitated before granting it. Marcus was respected throughout the territory, a warrior whose loyalty had never once been questioned during decades of service. Yet even respected men rarely sought private meetings with an Alpha King so close to his own wedding. Damien received him in a small study, rather than the formal council chamber, sensing correctly that whatever Marcus wished to discuss required discretion rather than public attention. Speak plainly, Damien said, settling behind his desk. What troubles you? Marcus hesitated only a moment before answering. There are rumors spreading through the markets, my king. Rumors of an attack in the northern territories, involving a woman and a young child of unusual strength. Damien's expression remained carefully neutral, though something tightened uncomfortably in his chest at the mention of the child's strength. Rumors of attacks are common enough along contested borders. Why bring this particular story to me? Marcus met his king's gaze steadily, choosing his words with obvious care. Because the woman involved is said to have gold eyes matching your own family line, my king, and because 3 years ago, another woman with connections to this very estate disappeared, under circumstances that were never fully explained. The room grew suddenly, uncomfortably silent. Damien felt something cold settle over his chest, a dawning suspicion he immediately tried to dismiss as impossible, absurd, the product of too many sleepless nights, and too much unexplained restlessness clouding his judgment. You believe this woman is Elena Hart, Damien said slowly, testing the name aloud for the first time in years, feeling the familiar ache that always accompanied its utterance. I believe it is possible, my king, Marcus said carefully. And if it is true, I believe the child she protects with such ferocity may be someone whose existence this territory needs to know about, regardless of what timing or circumstance surrounds his arrival. Damien rose from his desk and walked toward the window, staring out at the training grounds below without truly seeing them, his mind racing through implications he had not allowed himself to consider, even in his most private moments of doubt. A child, his child, if Marcus's suspicions proved correct. A son or daughter he had never known existed, conceived during a time when he had still believed, however briefly, that love and duty might somehow coexist within the same life. If this is true, Damien said finally, his voice quieter than before, then Elena has kept this secret for 3 years without a single word reaching me. Perhaps she had good reason to fear how such news would be received, my king, Marcus said gently, given the circumstances of her departure. Damien said nothing in response, guilt and confusion warring inside him with an intensity he had not felt in years. He thought of Serafina, of the wedding drawing steadily closer, of the political alliance his entire pact depended upon for continued stability and strength. He thought, too, of a child with gold eyes fighting for survival somewhere in the northern forests, a child who might share his own blood, his own legacy, his own responsibility to protect and provide. Find out everything you can, Damien said finally, turning back to face Marcus with new determination hardening his expression. Discreetly. If there is any truth to this rumor, I need to know before the wedding proceeds any further. Marcus bowed his head in acknowledgement and left the study quickly, already formulating a plan to investigate the rumors through channels quiet enough to avoid alerting the council or disrupting the carefully orchestrated wedding preparations currently consuming the entire territory's attention. Left alone once more, Damien remained standing at the window for a long time, staring out at nothing, his wolf stirring restlessly beneath his skin, as though it, too, sensed the approaching arrival of something that would change everything he believed about his carefully constructed future. He did not yet know that Elena and Kaelin had already crossed the border into his territory that very morning, walking steadily closer with each passing hour, carrying with them a truth that would soon make hiding, doubting, or denying entirely impossible. The forest paths inside Cross territory felt both familiar and foreign to Elena as she walked them again after 3 long years away. She recognized the shape of certain hills, the particular way sunlight filtered through the canopy, near the old training grounds, where young wolves once practiced their first shifts under careful supervision. Yet everything also felt subtly wrong, as though she were viewing a memory through glass, rather than walking through a place she had once called home. She kept close to the tree line, avoiding the main roads where pack patrols regularly passed, uncertain how she would be received if discovered before she had a chance to explain herself properly. Kaelin walked quietly beside her, his earlier curiosity tempered now by a seriousness that seemed far too heavy for a child his age. He had grown unusually attentive since the attack in the northern forest, flinching at sudden sounds, watching the shadows between trees with a wariness that broke Elena's heart every time she noticed it. We are getting close, she told him, as they paused beside a small stream to rest and drink. Just a little further now. Will there be more bad men here? Kaelin asked, his small voice carrying a fear that no child should have to carry. Elena knelt beside him, brushing dirt from his sleeve, forcing steadiness into her expression, despite the uncertainty gnawing at her own chest.
This is your father's territory. His warriors protect these lands very carefully. We should be safer here than anywhere else.
She believed this mostly, though a persistent unease continued nagging at the edges of her confidence. The men who had attacked them in the north had known exactly what Kaelin was, and exactly where to find them, which meant someone with resources and information had been tracking her son for some time before that attack occurred. If such a group existed with the patience and resources to track them across hundreds of miles, crossing into a heavily guarded territory would not necessarily stop them from trying again. Her instincts proved correct sooner than she expected. As they resumed walking that afternoon, following a narrow path that wound between dense clusters of pine trees, Elena caught an unfamiliar scent drifting on the wind, faint but unmistakable, the same disciplined and deliberate presence she had encountered in her garden days earlier. Her entire body went rigid with alarm. "Kaelin," she said quietly, gripping his hand tighter. "Stay close to me. Do not run unless I tell you to." The boy's eyes widened, gold flickering briefly at the edges, before settling back into worried brown, and he nodded without asking questions, trusting his mother completely, even as fear tightened his small features. They moved quickly off the main path, cutting through denser undergrowth in an attempt to lose whoever might be tracking them, but the scent persisted, growing steadily stronger no matter which direction they chose. Elena's heart pounded with increasing dread as she realized their pursuers had somehow anticipated her route, positioning themselves ahead rather than simply trailing behind. A figure stepped out from behind a wide oak tree directly in their path, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the same dark cloak Elena remembered from the attack in her garden. She recognized the voice immediately when he spoke, smooth and unhurried, utterly confident in his own advantage. "Clever of you to seek shelter in the cross territory," the cloaked figure said, though not clever enough, it seems. Elena pushed Kaelin behind her instinctively, her wolf rising sharply beneath her skin, teeth bared in warning despite the exhaustion still lingering in her body from days of hard travel. "You will not touch him," she said, voice shaking with fury rather than fear. "We have no interest in harming the child unnecessarily," the figure said, stepping closer with unhurried confidence. "Our employer simply wants him delivered alive. What happens to you in the process matters very little to us." Two more figures emerged from the trees on either side, boxing Elena and Kaelin into a narrow clearing with no clear path of escape. Elena's mind raced desperately, searching for any advantage, any option that might allow her to protect her son against three armed opponents, while her body still ached from injuries barely healed from their last encounter. She had no illusions about winning this fight cleanly. She only hoped she could hold them off long enough, could create enough chaos and delay, to give Kaelin any chance at all of escaping into the surrounding forest, where he might find help among the pack patrols she knew regularly monitored these borders. "Run," she whispered to Kaelin, her eyes never leaving the approaching figures. "Run, toward the sound of water. Damanchu, do not stop, no matter what you hear behind you." "Mama." "No. Now, Kaelin." The boy hesitated only a single agonizing second before obeying, sprinting toward the distant sound of the stream they had passed earlier, his small legs moving as fast as fear and love for his mother could carry them. Elena shifted immediately, throwing herself at the nearest attacker with everything her exhausted body could offer, buying precious seconds for her son's escape, even as she understood clearly how outmatched she truly was against three well-prepared opponents. The fight that followed was brutal and short. Elena fought with the desperate ferocity of a mother defending everything she loved, landing solid strikes against two of her attackers, before the third managed to catch her from behind, pinning her against the rough bark of a nearby tree, with enough force to drive the breath from her lungs entirely. "Foolish woman," the cloaked figure said, stepping closer as his companions restrained her fully. "Did you truly believe running would save either of you?" Elena struggled against their grip, searching desperately through the trees for any sign of Kaelin, praying he had run far enough to remain safely hidden from whatever came next. Her body ached everywhere, blood trickling from a fresh wound along her temple, yet her mind remained fixed entirely on her son's safety, rather than her own suffering. "He will find help," she gasped out, defiance burning fiercely despite her helpless position. This territory belongs to his father. Someone will find him before you do." The cloaked figure paused at this, something flickering briefly across the shadowed portion of his face that Elena could not quite identify. "His father," he repeated softly, as though testing the words for truth. "The Alpha King himself, perhaps." Elena said nothing further, unwilling to confirm details these men had clearly already suspected, but perhaps not fully confirmed. The figure studied her for a long moment, before turning toward his companions, issuing a quiet command that sent one of them sprinting into the trees in the direction Kalen had fled only minutes earlier. Panic surged through Elena with fresh intensity, and she fought against her captors with renewed desperation, screaming Kalen's name into the forest, despite knowing the futility of the gesture. The remaining two attackers held her firmly in place, their grip unyielding despite her struggles, and she could do nothing but watch helplessly, as the third disappeared into the trees pursuing her son. Somewhere in those same woods, unbeknownst to any of them, Marcus had been conducting his own quiet investigation that very afternoon, following faint reports of strangers spotted near the northern border patrols. He moved silently through familiar terrain, senses alert for anything unusual, when a small figure suddenly burst from the undergrowth directly into his path, running with a speed and desperation that immediately set every protective instinct within him into sharp alertness. The boy was small, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, with gold eyes wide with terror, and a scent that struck Marcus instantly with undeniable recognition. There was no mistaking the resemblance, no denying the connection between this frightened child and the Alpha King whose service Marcus had devoted his entire life to protecting. "It is all right," Marcus said quickly, kneeling to the boy's level despite the urgency clearly written across the child's small face. "You are safe now. Where is your mother?" "They took her," Kalen gasped between desperate breaths, pointing back toward the trees behind him. "Bad men, please, you have to help her." Marcus rose immediately, every instinct honed from decades of service, snapping instantly into action. He lifted Kalen carefully, settling the boy securely against his shoulder, despite the child's protests to be put down and allowed to help. "I am going to get you somewhere safe first," Marcus said firmly, already moving swiftly through the trees toward the nearest patrol outpost. "And then I promise you, we will bring your mother home." Behind them, deep within the forest, Elena continued struggling against her captors, unaware that her son had found exactly the protection she had hoped for, unaware that the very warrior who had first suspected her secret 3 days earlier now carried her frightened child toward safety, setting into motion events that would soon bring the full weight of the Crosspack's protection down upon whoever dared threaten the Alpha King's newly discovered heir. Marcus ran faster than he had in years, Kalen clutched securely against his chest, the boy's small fingers gripping his tunic with desperate strength, as fear for his mother overpowered every other emotion. The nearest patrol outpost sat less than a mile from where they had met, and Marcus covered the distance in a fraction of the time it would normally take, his warrior's training carrying him swiftly over uneven ground, while his mind raced through the implications of what he had just discovered. A child with the Alpha King's eyes, running terrified through the forest, claiming his mother had been taken by armed strangers. There was no time to process the full weight of what this meant. There was only time to act. He burst into the outpost clearing, startling the 2 guards stationed there into immediate alertness. "Send word to the estate," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent in service to the pack. "Tell them Marcus requires an armed escort immediately, and inform the Alpha King personally that his presence is required without delay." The guards exchanged uncertain glances at the strange child in Marcus's arms, but years of discipline kept questions at bay, in favor of immediate obedience. One sprinted toward the estate, while the other began organizing a small group of nearby warriors, sensing correctly that whatever situation had prompted such urgency deserved immediate and serious attention. Marcus set Kalen down gently on a wooden bench inside the outpost, kneeling before him despite the pressing need for haste, understanding that a frightened child required at least a moment of reassurance before anything else could proceed effectively. "You did exactly the right thing," Marcus said gently, meeting the boy's tearful gold eyes with steady reassurance. "Running for help was very brave. Now I need you to tell me everything you can about where your mother is." Kalen wiped his face with the back of his small hand, struggling to steady his breathing enough to speak clearly. 3 men, he managed finally. "They had her. In the trees, back that way." He pointed toward the direction from which he had come, his hand trembling slightly. "Please, you have to help her, please." "We will," Marcus promised, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he found himself making a vow with the full weight of his heart behind it, rather than simple professional obligation. "I promise you, we will bring her back safely." Word reached the Cross estate within minutes, delivered by a breathless young guard who managed only fragments of coherent explanation before Damien, sensing immediately that something significant had occurred, demanded the full story without delay. The guard explained as best he could, describing a child matching the description Marcus had shared just days earlier, a child with gold eyes and unmistakable resemblance to the Alpha King himself, currently sheltered at the northern outpost while his mother remained captive somewhere in the surrounding forest. Damien felt the world tilt strangely beneath him, as the pieces assembled themselves into a truth he had suspected, but not yet fully allowed himself to believe. Elena, his son, both of them here, in his own territory, in immediate and serious danger. He did not hesitate. Within minutes, he had gathered a group of his most capable warriors, abandoning wedding preparations and council obligations entirely without a second thought, his wolf rising with a fierce and protective intensity he had not felt in 3 long years. Whatever doubts had clouded his judgment about the truth of Marcus's suspicions vanished completely, replaced by a single overwhelming imperative that eclipsed every other concern currently occupying his territory. Find them. Protect them. Whatever it costs. The ride to the northern outpost felt agonizingly slow, despite the speed at which his warriors traveled, every mile stretching Damien's patience to its breaking point, as he imagined countless terrible possibilities awaiting his arrival. He had spent 3 years telling himself that rejecting Elena had been necessary, that duty required sacrifices too painful for softer hearts to understand. Yet none of that careful reasoning mattered now, dissolved entirely beneath the desperate need to ensure her safety, and the safety of a child he had not even known existed until this very hour. They arrived at the outpost as evening shadows lengthened across the clearing, and Damien dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding immediately toward the small building, where Marcus waited with Kaelin beside him. The moment their eyes met, Damien felt something inside his chest crack open completely. The boy looked up at him with an expression of cautious curiosity, gold eyes wide and searching, and Damien felt his own wolf surge forward with a recognition so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. There was no mistaking the resemblance, the shape of the jaw, the particular arch of the eyebrows, even the wary, watchful stillness with which the boy studied him. All of it mirrored Damien, so precisely that any lingering doubt evaporated instantly, replaced by a certainty that struck him with the force of a physical blow. This was his son. "Kaelin," Marcus said gently, kneeling beside the boy. "This is Alpha, King Damien Cross." Kaelin's eyes widened further, flicking between Marcus and the tall stranger before him, with obvious uncertainty. "Are you my father?" the boy asked, his small voice carrying a mixture of hope and fear that struck Damien somewhere deep and unguarded. Damien knelt slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level, his throat tight with emotions he had not experienced in years. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice rougher than he intended. "I believe I am." Kaelin studied him for a long moment before speaking again, his next words delivered with the blunt honesty only a child could manage. "Then you need to save my mother. Please, she protected me. Now you have to protect her." The simple, direct plea cut through every remaining hesitation Damien might have felt, every complicated tangle of guilt and confusion regarding his past treatment of Elena, replacing it entirely with fierce, single-minded determination. "I promise you," Damien said, meeting his son's gaze steadily, "we will bring her home." He rose immediately, turning to Marcus and the assembled warriors with sharp, decisive commands. "Show me exactly where you found him. We move now, before darkness makes tracking impossible." Marcus nodded, already moving to lead the group back toward the forest path where he had first encountered the terrified boy, while 2 guards remained behind to watch over Kaelin, promising the child repeatedly that his father's warriors would return safely with his mother. As Damien mounted his horse once more, preparing to lead the rescue effort into the darkening forest, his wolf howled inside him, with an intensity he had not felt since the very night he had rejected the mate bond 3 years earlier. He understood now, with painful clarity, exactly what that persistent restlessness of recent weeks had truly meant. His bond with Elena had never actually died, no matter how firmly he had believed otherwise. It had simply been waiting, silent and patient, for the moment when its true purpose would finally reveal itself. He rode hard into the forest, Marcus and a dozen armed warriors following close behind, every one of them driven now by the shared understanding that somewhere in the darkening woods, the Alpha King's true Luna remained in grave danger, and that nothing short of her safe return would be considered an acceptable outcome for this desperate night. The forest grew darker with every passing minute, shadows lengthening into deep pools of black beneath the ancient trees. Yet Damien pressed forward without hesitation, his wolf senses sharpened by desperation, into an almost supernatural awareness of every subtle disturbance in the surrounding woods. Somewhere ahead, faint but unmistakable, he caught the scent of blood, of fear, of a fight recently fought and not yet finished. He urged his horse faster, his warriors matching his pace without question, all of them sensing the urgency radiating from their king, with an intensity that left no room for doubt or delay. Whatever waited at the end of this desperate ride, Damien intended to ensure that Elena Hart, the woman he had once so foolishly rejected, would survive this night to see her son again, and to finally receive the protection and recognition she should have been given 3 long years ago. Elena's arms had gone numb from the strain of being held against the rough bark for what felt like an eternity, though in truth only 20 minutes had passed since her son disappeared into the surrounding trees. The cloaked figure paced before her with unsettling patience, occasionally glancing toward the direction his companion had gone in pursuit of Kaelin, betraying no obvious concern despite the passing time. Elena's mind churned with desperate possibilities, each one worse than the last, as she imagined her son alone, and frightened somewhere in unfamiliar territory, pursued by a man with no apparent hesitation about harming a child if it served his purpose. "Your silence is admirable," the cloaked figure said eventually, turning his attention back toward her. "But ultimately pointless. We know who fathered your son. We know what that means for our employer's interests. The only question remaining is how much unnecessary suffering you wish to endure before accepting the inevitable. Whoever employs you will find the crosspack far less forgiving than you imagine," Elena spat back, fury overriding the fear that threatened to consume her entirely. "You have made a grave mistake coming into this territory." The figure laughed softly, though something in the sound carried less confidence than before. "The crosspack does not yet know your son exists. By the time they discover the truth, we will be long gone, and your son will belong to someone who understands exactly how to use royal blood for maximum advantage." Elena's heart clenched with dread at these words, but before she could respond, a sound cut through the forest that made every remaining shred of confidence drain instantly from the cloaked figure's posture. Hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast and without any attempt at stealth, accompanied by the unmistakable growl of wolves, shifting mid-stride into their fighting forms. The 2 guards holding Elena tensed immediately, exchanging uncertain glances with their leader, whose earlier composure had evaporated entirely in the face of this unexpected development. "Impossible," the cloaked figure muttered, backing away slightly as the sounds grew steadily closer. No one should have known to look here so quickly. Elena felt a surge of desperate hope rise within her chest, though she forced herself to remain cautious, uncertain whether this approaching force represented rescue or an entirely different threat altogether. She did not have long to wait for an answer. Damien burst into the small clearing first, his wolf form massive and terrifying in the fading evening light, eyes blazing with a fury Elena had never witnessed from him, even during their most difficult moments together 3 years earlier. Marcus and a dozen additional warriors followed close behind, quickly spreading out to surround the clearing and cut off any possible escape route for Elena's captors. The cloaked figure's companions released her instantly, backing away with hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender that did nothing to soften the murderous intent radiating from every warrior now surrounding them. Elena stumbled forward, catching herself against a nearby tree, her eyes fixed disbelievingly on the massive wolf form standing protectively between her and her former captors. Damien shifted back to his human form almost instantly, closing the remaining distance between them with swift, urgent strides, his expression a complicated mixture of relief, fury, and something far more vulnerable that Elena had not expected to see from him ever again. "Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion he made no attempt to hide, "are you hurt?" She stared at him for a long moment, overwhelmed by the surreal collision of past and present colliding so violently within this single terrifying evening. "Kaelin," she managed finally, ignoring his question entirely, in favor of the only concern that truly mattered. "Where is my son?" "Safe," Damien said immediately, relief evident in his own expression as he registered her uninjured state, aside from the various scrapes and bruises marking her arms and face. "He is safe at the northern outpost, waiting for you." He led Marcus directly to us. Elena's knees nearly buckled with the force of relief flooding through her entire body, and Damien instinctively reached to steady her, his hands warm and familiar against her arms, despite 3 years of separation and heartbreak standing between them. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, simply absorbing the reality of standing together again after so long, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy in the space between them. The moment shattered as the cloaked figure attempted a desperate escape into the surrounding trees, only to be intercepted immediately by 2 of Damien's warriors, who dragged him back into the clearing despite his struggles. Damien's expression hardened instantly, releasing Elena gently and turning his full attention toward the captured intruder. "Who sent you?" Damien demanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as Alpha King. "Who ordered an attack against a woman and child within my territory?" The cloaked figure remained defiantly silent, though fear had clearly begun replacing his earlier confidence, now that capture, rather than success, appeared inevitable. Damien studied him for a long moment, before turning to Marcus with clipped instructions. "Take them to the estate for proper questioning. I want to know everyone involved in this, and I want to know before the sun rises tomorrow." Marcus nodded, immediately organizing the warriors to secure the 3 captured attackers for transport back to Cross Territory's main estate, leaving Damien and Elena finally alone in the clearing, as evening shadows deepened around them. For a long moment, neither spoke, the weight of 3 years of separation and unspoken history settling heavily between them, despite the urgency of everything that had just occurred. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how disheveled and exhausted she appeared, painfully conscious of the contrast between her current state and the carefully composed woman Damien had once known. "Why didn't you tell me?" Damien asked finally, his voice quiet, but carrying an undertone of genuine hurt that surprised Elena despite everything she knew about his capacity for controlled emotion. "About Kaelin. About any of it." Elena's own hurt rose sharply in response, 3 years of carefully suppressed anger finding sudden release now that the immediate danger had passed. "You rejected me in front of your entire pack," she said, her voice shaking, with barely contained emotion. "You told me the mate bond made you weak, that duty demanded you choose differently. What was I supposed to do, Damien? Return weeks later and announce I carried your child, knowing your council would either use him as a political tool or reject him entirely, the same way you rejected me?" Damien flinched visibly at her words, guilt washing plainly across his features despite his obvious attempt to maintain composure. "I was wrong," he said quietly, "about all of it. I understand that now, though understanding it 3 years too late does little to repair the damage my choice caused you." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any trace of the calculating political creature the council had likely shaped him into during their years apart, yet finding instead something that looked remarkably like genuine remorse. "You are engaged to be married," she said finally, forcing the words out despite the pain they caused her. "Your wedding is weeks away. Whatever you feel standing here tonight changes nothing about that reality." Something shifted in Damien's expression at these words, a hardening resolve replacing the earlier vulnerability. "Nothing has been finalized that cannot be changed," he said firmly. "Not now that I know the truth about my son, and about you." Elena wanted desperately to believe him, yet 3 years of hard-won caution held her back from accepting his words at face value. "Your council will not accept this easily," she said. "A political marriage carries weight beyond your personal feelings, Damien. You know this better than anyone." "Perhaps," Damien acknowledged, "but I have spent 3 years allowing my council to shape decisions that should have belonged to my own heart. That mistake has already cost me more than I can properly express. I do not intend to repeat it." Before Elena could respond further, exhaustion and delayed shock from the evening's violence finally overwhelmed her completely, her legs giving way beneath her without warning. Damien caught her instantly, lifting her carefully despite her weak protests, and carried her toward his waiting horse, with a tenderness that spoke louder than any words he might have offered. "Rest now," he said quietly, as he settled her securely for the ride back to the estate. There will be time enough for difficult conversations, once you and Kaelin are both properly safe and rested. Elena did not have the strength left to argue, allowing exhaustion to finally claim her, as Damien guided his horse back toward the northern outpost, where their son waited anxiously for his mother's safe return. The complicated truth of their shared history, now fully exposed, and impossible to ignore any longer within the walls of Cross territory. Kaelin spotted his mother, before the horses had even fully entered the outpost clearing, breaking free from the guard who had been watching over him and sprinting across the grounds with a speed that startled the adults around him. "Mama!" Damien dismounted quickly, lifting Elena down carefully, before she could attempt the movement herself, and barely had time to steady her, before Kaelin collided with them both, wrapping his small arms around his mother's waist with desperate relief. Elena sank to her knees despite her exhaustion, pulling her son into a proper embrace, tears finally breaking free after hours of forced composure during the crisis. "You are safe," she whispered into his hair, holding him as tightly as her weakened arms allowed. "You are safe, my love." Kaelin pulled back just enough to look up at her, his gold eyes bright with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "I ran, Mama, just like you said. I found help." "You did so well," Elena said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I am so proud of you." Damien watched this reunion with an ache in his chest he had not anticipated, standing slightly apart from the embrace, despite every instinct urging him to close the distance and become part of it himself. He had missed 3 years of his son's life, 3 years of bedtime stories and small triumphs, and quiet moments that should have belonged to him as much as to Elena. The weight of that loss settled heavily upon him as he watched mother and son cling to each other in the fading evening light. Kaelin noticed him standing there after a moment, disentangling himself gently from his mother's arms, to study his father, with renewed curiosity, now that the immediate crisis had passed. "You saved her," the boy said, as though testing the statement for accuracy. "I did what any father would do," Damien said quietly, kneeling to meet the boy's eye level once more. "Protecting you and your mother is the most important thing in the world to me now." Kaelin studied him for a long moment before stepping forward hesitantly, closing the remaining distance between them, and Damien felt something inside his chest break open completely, as his son wrapped small arms around his neck, in an embrace neither of them had expected to happen so quickly. He held the boy carefully, overwhelmed by emotions he had spent years training himself to suppress, in favor of the controlled composure his position demanded. Elena watched this exchange with complicated feelings rising within her own chest, relief and lingering hurt tangling together, as she witnessed the natural bond forming so quickly between father and son, despite 3 years of complete separation. Whatever anger she still carried toward Damien for his past rejection, she could not deny the genuine warmth evident in the way he held their child now. They returned to the Cross estate as full darkness settled over the territory, Kaelin riding securely in front of his father, while Elena traveled alongside on a separate horse, her strength gradually returning during the journey, despite the deep exhaustion still weighing heavily upon her. The estate loomed ahead eventually, torchlight flickering along its stone walls, appearing far more imposing to Elena now than it had felt during her earlier years living within its boundaries as a hopeful young Luna candidate. Word of their arrival spread quickly through the estate's staff and guards, whispered speculation following them as they made their way toward the private wing, where Damien intended to house them safely away from prying eyes and unnecessary complications, at least until proper arrangements could be made. Serafina heard the rumors before she saw them arrive personally, a servant delivering fragmented details about a woman and child brought back from the northern forests under the Alpha King's direct protection. Details that immediately raised her suspicions, given the timing so close to her own upcoming wedding. She made her way toward the private wing with mounting unease, arriving just as Damien settled Elena and Kaelin into a guest chamber, giving quiet instructions to the attending staff regarding their care and comfort. "Damien," Serafina said from the doorway, her voice carefully controlled despite the tension evident in her posture. "Might I ask what is happening here?" Damien turned to face her, and something in his expression, a complicated mixture of guilt and resolve, told Serafina immediately that whatever answer he provided would not be one she wished to hear. He stepped into the hallway, closing the door partially behind him to grant Elena and Kaelin a measure of privacy while he addressed the difficult conversation that could no longer be postponed. "There is something I need to explain to you," Damien said quietly. "Something that changes the circumstances of our engagement significantly." Serafina's expression tightened, though she maintained her composure through years of careful training. "The woman inside that room, who is she to you?" Damien hesitated only a moment before answering with the full honesty the situation demanded. "Her name is Elena Hart. 3 years ago, before I ever met you, she was my true fated mate. I rejected the bond, believing it would make me unfit to rule effectively." He paused, gathering himself before continuing. "I did not know, until today, that she carried my child at the time of that rejection. The boy inside that room is my son." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy, Serafina's carefully composed expression cracking slightly beneath the weight of this unexpected revelation. "Your son," she repeated slowly, processing the full implications of his words. "And what exactly does this mean for our arrangement, Damien?" "I do not yet know precisely how everything will unfold," Damien admitted honestly. "But I know I cannot continue pretending that a political marriage takes precedence over the reality of my own child's existence, or over the mate bond I never should have rejected in the first place." Serafina absorbed this with visible difficulty, her hands clasped tightly before her, as she fought to maintain some semblance of dignity, despite the devastating nature of what she had just learned. "I have spent months preparing for a life beside you," she said finally, her voice thick with barely restrained emotion. "Our families have invested significant resources and political capital into this alliance. You cannot simply dismiss all of that, because a woman you rejected years ago has suddenly reappeared with a convenient child in tow." "I understand the difficulty this creates," Damien said, guilt evident in every word. "And I take full responsibility for the situation, including whatever consequences arise from my own past decisions. But I cannot in good conscience proceed with our wedding while knowing the truth I now know." Serafina's composure finally broke, tears gathering in her eyes, despite her clear efforts to prevent them. "So that is it then? Years of preparation, months of genuine effort on my part to build something real between us, all discarded the moment your former lover reappears with a child." "Serafina, do not," she said sharply, raising a hand to stop him. "I deserve better than empty apologies, Damien. If you intend to end our engagement, at least have the courage to do so plainly, rather than dressing it in careful words, meant to soften a blow that will devastate my family's standing, regardless of how gently you deliver it." Damien remained silent for a long moment, recognizing the truth and fairness in her anger, despite his own overwhelming need to prioritize Elena and Kaelin's safety, and his own long-buried feelings. "You are right," he said finally. "I owe you honesty rather than careful diplomacy. I cannot proceed with our marriage, Serafina. I am deeply sorry for the pain this decision causes you and your family, but I cannot build a future on a foundation that ignores both my son's existence and the mate bond I should never have abandoned 3 years ago." Serafina studied him for a long moment, grief and fury mingling visibly across her features, before she finally straightened her shoulders, reclaiming some measure of the composure that had served her throughout a lifetime of careful political training. "The council will not accept this easily," she said, her voice steadying, despite the tears still tracking down her cheeks. "You realize this will create significant turmoil within your own territory, quite apart from the damage it does to relations between our two packs." "I am aware," Damien said quietly, "and I intend to address those consequences directly, whatever they require of me." Serafina turned to leave, pausing only briefly at the threshold to deliver one final, quietly devastating observation. "I hope she is worth everything you are about to sacrifice for her, Damien. Because from where I stand, you are dismantling years of careful political stability for a woman who abandoned this territory without a single word of explanation 3 years ago." She left, without waiting for a response, her footsteps echoing sharply down the stone corridor, leaving Damien alone, with the full weight of everything he had just set into motion. He knew Serafina's warning carried significant truth. The council would fight this decision fiercely, and the political fallout from abandoning an alliance so close to its formal completion would likely create lasting complications throughout the territory for years to come. Yet as he turned back toward the guest chamber where Elena and Kaelin waited, exhausted, but finally safe after the terrible ordeal of that long and dangerous day, Damien felt a certainty settle over him that outweighed every political concern the council might raise against him. He had made the wrong choice once already, prioritizing duty over the bond that should have defined his entire life. He did not intend to make that same mistake twice, regardless of what price his pride and political standing might be forced to pay for choosing differently this time. By morning, news of the broken engagement had spread through every corner of the Cross estate, whispered between servants, debated urgently among warriors, and finally delivered in its full, unwelcome detail to the assembled council members who governed alongside the Alpha King on matters of critical importance to the pack's future. Damien called an emergency session shortly after sunrise, standing before the same council chamber where he had once formally rejected Elena 3 years earlier. The irony of the location not lost on him as he prepared to deliver news that would undoubtedly provoke fierce resistance from men and women who had spent months carefully constructing the political alliance he now intended to abandon entirely. The council members filed in with expressions ranging from confusion to open hostility, several of them having already heard fragmented versions of the previous night's events from various sources throughout the estate. Elder Gideon, the most senior member of the council, and a man who had served Damien's father before him, took his seat at the head of the long table, with visible displeasure evident in his weathered features. "We have heard troubling rumors this morning," Gideon began without preamble, "that you intend to abandon your engagement to Serafina, based on the sudden reappearance of a woman you rejected years ago, along with a child whose legitimacy has not been properly verified." "The child's legitimacy is not in question," Damien said firmly, standing rather than taking his usual seat, wanting to address the council from a position of clear authority, rather than casual discussion. "His resemblance to me is undeniable, and I have no doubt whatsoever regarding his parentage." "Undeniable resemblance is not the same as verified bloodline through proper pack channels," another council member interjected, a woman named Margaret who had long served as an advisor on matters of lineage and succession. "If this child is to be recognized as your heir, proper verification rituals must be conducted, regardless of how convincing his appearance might seem." "I have no objection to proper verification," Damien said, "but regardless of ritual formalities, I already know the truth in my heart, and my wolf recognized him the instant we met. That recognition is not something either of us can fake or manufacture for political convenience." Gideon leaned forward, his expression hardening further. "Even accepting the child's legitimacy, this does not adequately address the far more pressing concern of abandoning an alliance that took months to negotiate and secure. The Ashford pack will not accept this rejection quietly, Damien. Relations between our territories could deteriorate significantly, potentially even reaching the point of open conflict." "I understand the risk," Damien said, "and I intend to work diligently to preserve peaceful relations with the Ashford pack through whatever diplomatic means remain available to us. But I will not build my family's future on a foundation that ignores the mate bond I foolishly rejected 3 years ago, particularly not now that I understand the full cost of that rejection." The council chamber erupted into overlapping voices, some supportive, most skeptical, all clearly troubled by the sudden upheaval threatening to disrupt carefully laid political plans. Elena, standing quietly near the chamber entrance where she had been permitted to observe the proceedings, felt the weight of every hostile glance directed her way, understanding clearly that many within this room viewed her return as nothing more than a dangerous complication threatening the stability they had worked so hard to secure. "May I speak?" she asked finally, stepping forward despite the obvious discomfort evident throughout the chamber at her presence. Gideon studied her for a long moment, before nodding curtly, granting permission with obvious reluctance. Elena straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of courage she had cultivated through 3 difficult years of raising her son alone, and addressed the assembled council with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "I did not return to this territory seeking political advantage or personal revenge against anyone within these walls," she said clearly. "I returned because my son's life was threatened by men who had discovered his bloodline and intended to use him for purposes I can only imagine were deeply harmful. I sought protection for my child, nothing more. Whatever consequences my return creates for existing political arrangements were never my intention, and I regret any hardship this causes, particularly for Serafina, who deserves better than the pain this situation has caused her." Her honesty seemed to shift something within the room, several council members exchanging glances that suggested her words had found some measure of sympathy despite their broader concerns. Margaret spoke next, her tone slightly softer than before. "You claim your son was threatened. By whom? Precisely." "We captured 3 individuals responsible for the attack," Damien interjected before Elena could respond. "They were questioned overnight, and I have their full confession ready to share with this council." He gestured toward Marcus, who stepped forward from his position near the chamber doors, carrying a small ledger containing detailed notes from the previous night's interrogation. The captured men confirmed they were hired by a faction operating outside any recognized pack territory, Marcus explained. A group that specializes in locating and capturing unclaimed bloodlines of significant power, intending to sell such individuals to the highest bidder among various parties, interested in acquiring exceptional wolf abilities for their own purposes. The chamber fell into stunned silence at this revelation. Gideon's expression shifted from hostile skepticism to genuine alarm. "You are suggesting an organized network exists specifically targeting powerful bloodlines across multiple territories?" "That is precisely what the evidence suggests," Marcus confirmed. "And if such a network already identified Kaelin's existence and located him despite years of careful concealment, it stands to reason they may continue targeting him, and potentially other vulnerable individuals throughout our territories, unless decisive action is taken to address the threat directly." This revelation shifted the entire tenor of the council's discussion. Concerns about political alliance and marriage arrangements suddenly overshadowed by the far more serious implication of an organized threat operating with apparent impunity across multiple pack territories. Gideon exchanged glances with several other council members before addressing Damien directly. "This changes the calculus considerably," he admitted, though clear reluctance remained evident in his tone. "If your son faces genuine and ongoing danger from external threats, providing him proper protection within this territory becomes a matter of security, rather than simply personal preference. Then you understand why I cannot proceed with my planned marriage while abandoning my son and his mother to face such threats without the full protection my position affords them," Damien said firmly. Gideon remained silent for a long moment, clearly weighing competing obligations and concerns, before finally responding with measured caution. "The council will need time to properly discuss the full implications of everything revealed this morning, including appropriate verification rituals for young Kaelin's bloodline, and careful diplomatic strategies for managing our relationship with the Ashford pack moving forward. But I acknowledge that protecting a threatened child, particularly one who may indeed be your legitimate heir, cannot reasonably be dismissed in favor of political convenience alone." It was not full acceptance, but it represented significant progress from the outright hostility with which the council had entered this emergency session. Damien felt a measure of relief loosen the tension that had gripped his shoulders since the previous evening, though he understood clearly that difficult negotiations and lingering resentments would likely continue for some time before this matter fully settled. As the council session concluded, with various members departing to discuss the morning's revelations among themselves, Elena found herself standing alone with Damien in the now emptying chamber, the weight of everything decided and everything still uncertain hanging heavily between them. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for defending us so directly, even knowing the political cost it demands of you." "You and Kaelin deserved that defense 3 years ago," Damien said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "I am simply trying, however imperfectly, to provide now what I failed to offer then." Elena studied him carefully, searching his expression for any trace of the calculating political creature she had feared he might have become during their years apart, yet finding instead someone who seemed genuinely committed to correcting the mistakes of his past, regardless of what personal or political cost that correction demanded. "The council may eventually accept Kaelin," she said carefully, "but accepting me as your Luna is an entirely different matter. Many of them never approved of me, even before my rejection. Then they will need to learn to accept my choice," Damien said firmly, "because I do not intend to reject this bond a second time, regardless of what resistance the council or anyone else chooses to offer against it." Elena felt something warm and cautiously hopeful stirring within her chest for the first time in 3 long years, though old wounds and hard-won caution prevented her from fully trusting this apparent transformation just yet. Whatever future awaited them within these walls, she understood clearly that significant challenges remained ahead, challenges that would test both Damien's resolve and her own willingness to trust him again, after everything that had already passed between them. 3 weeks passed before the cross pack gathered again in the Great Hall, this time for a ceremony entirely different from the engagement celebration that had taken place there before Elena's dramatic return. In the days following that difficult council session, Damien had worked tirelessly to repair what damage he could with the Ashford pack, traveling personally to meet with Serafina's family and offer both sincere apology and generous compensation for the broken alliance, along with proposals for alternative diplomatic arrangements that might preserve peaceful relations between their territories despite the cancelled marriage. Serafina herself, though understandably hurt by the entire situation, ultimately accepted his efforts with a grace that spoke well of her character, expressing quiet hope that she might eventually find a partnership built on more genuine affection than political convenience alone had originally offered her. The captured hunters, meanwhile, revealed under continued questioning the identity of the shadowy network employing them, information that allowed Damien and several allied Alpha leaders to begin coordinated efforts toward dismantling the dangerous organization before it could threaten other vulnerable bloodlines throughout their territories. It was slow, careful work, unlikely to reach full resolution for months or even years, but the first crucial steps had been taken, and Kaelin's safety within cross territory had been significantly strengthened through additional protective measures Damien insisted upon implementing immediately. Elena spent those 3 weeks slowly adjusting to life within walls she had once fled in heartbreak, finding the transition both easier and more complicated than she had anticipated. Kaelin flourished under his father's attention, the two of them spending increasing amounts of time together as Damien worked to make up for 3 years of absence through patient, consistent presence in his son's daily life. Watching them together, sharing quiet moments over meals or exploring the training grounds where Kaelin's growing strength continued to astonish even experienced pack warriors, Elena felt old wounds gradually beginning to heal, replaced slowly by a cautious hope she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Her relationship with Damien himself proved more complicated to navigate. Trust, once broken so publicly and painfully, could not be rebuilt through simple declarations or good intentions alone, regardless of how sincere those intentions proved to be. They spent long evenings in careful conversation, working through 3 years of unspoken hurt and misunderstanding, Damien listening with patient humility, as Elena expressed anger and grief she had suppressed for far too long, while she in turn came to understand more fully the pressures and fears that had driven his original rejection of their bond. Slowly, gradually, something new began growing between them, built not on the untested passion of their earlier courtship, but on a more mature foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and shared devotion to their son's well-being. It was not an instant restoration of everything they had once shared, but rather a careful, deliberate reconstruction of trust, brick by patient brick, that felt somehow more solid and enduring than what had come before. Elder Gideon and the rest of the council, faced with mounting evidence of the genuine danger Kaelin had escaped and continued to face, gradually softened their earlier resistance, particularly after formal verification rituals confirmed beyond any doubt the boy's legitimate bloodline connection to the Cross family line. Margaret, once among the most skeptical voices during that difficult emergency session, became one of Kaelin's most devoted advocates within the council, recognizing in the boy's remarkable strength and gentle temperament the makings of an exceptional future leader for their pack. The formal ceremony, when it finally arrived on a clear autumn afternoon, drew a crowd even larger than the failed engagement celebration weeks earlier. Curiosity and cautious optimism drawing pack members from every corner of the territory, eager to witness the resolution of a story that had already spread throughout their community in countless whispered variations. Damien stood once more at the head of the Great Hall, though his posture and expression carried none of the hollow resignation that had marked his previous appearance in this same position. Elena stood beside him now, dressed simply but elegantly in deep blue fabric that complemented her dark hair. Kaelin positioned between them with his small hand held securely in his father's larger one. 3 years ago, Damien began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the silent hall, I stood in this very place and made the gravest mistake of my life. I rejected a bond that should have defined my entire existence, believing foolishly that duty and love could not coexist within a single heart. That mistake cost me 3 years I can never reclaim. 3 years of my son's childhood I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for. He turned to look at Elena directly, his expression open and vulnerable, in a way few present had ever witnessed from their carefully controlled Alpha King. Elena Hart endured that rejection with more grace and strength than I deserved, protecting our son alone against dangers I cannot fully imagine, never once seeking to use his existence for personal or political advantage, even when doing so might have made her own life considerably easier. He knelt then, before the entire assembled pack, taking Elena's hand in his own, with a solemnity that carried the full weight of formal ceremony. I formally acknowledge Elena Hart as my true mate and rightful Luna of this pack, a title I should never have denied her, and which I now offer with complete certainty, and without any reservation whatsoever. Elena felt tears gathering, despite her best efforts to maintain composure. 3 years of pain and struggle finally finding resolution in this public acknowledgement she had once believed she would never receive. She helped Damien rise, and together they turned to face their assembled pack, Kaelin still held securely between them. "And I formally acknowledge Kaelin Cross," Damien continued, his voice thick with emotion, "as my legitimate son and rightful heir to the Crosspack leadership, a position he will grow into, with the full support and protection of this entire territory standing behind him." The hall erupted into applause far more genuine and heartfelt than the polite celebration that had marked the earlier failed engagement, pack members young and old, expressing sincere joy at witnessing this remarkable resolution to a story that had captured their collective attention and sympathy over recent difficult weeks. Marcus, standing near the front of the assembled crowd, allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile, knowing his own instincts and careful investigation had played no small role in bringing this joyful outcome into being. Kaelin, overwhelmed by the sudden attention and celebration, pressed close against his mother's side, though a small, proud smile had begun forming on his young face as he slowly understood the significance of what had just occurred. He was no longer a secret hidden away in a small forest house, no longer a vulnerable target requiring constant concealment and careful protection through isolation alone. He was, instead, publicly and formally recognized as exactly what he had always been, the beloved son of 2 parents, finally united in purpose and devotion, protected now by the full strength and resources of an entire pack standing firmly behind him. That evening, after the formal celebrations had concluded and the great hall had emptied of its jubilant crowd, Damien found Elena standing alone on the same balcony where he had once felt his wolf stir restlessly on the night of his ill-fated engagement toast. She turned as he approached, her expression softer and more peaceful than he had seen it since her return weeks earlier. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked quietly, as he joined her at the railing, both of them gazing out over the training grounds, bathed now in soft moonlight. "The years of hiding, the danger Kaelin faced, everything that led us back to this exact moment." Damien considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret every day I spent apart from you and our son," he said honestly. "I regret the pain my rejection caused you, and the dangers you faced alone, that I should have been present to help you confront. But I cannot fully regret the path that led us here tonight, because it brought us finally to a place where truth, rather than fear or misguided duty, defines the foundation of everything we build together moving forward." Elena leaned into him slightly, allowing herself for the first time in years to simply rest against someone else's strength, rather than carrying every burden alone. "Kaelin asked me today whether we would stay here forever," she said softly. "I did not know how to answer him properly." "Tell him yes," Damien said firmly, wrapping his arms securely around her shoulders. "Tell him this territory is his home now, protected and secure, exactly as it always should have been from the very beginning. Tell him his family is finally, completely whole." Elena smiled then, a genuine and unguarded expression that reminded Damien powerfully of the hopeful young woman he had once fallen in love with before duty and fear had driven them apart. Somewhere below them, in a peaceful bedroom within the estate's private quarters, their son slept soundly for the first time in longer than either parent could properly remember, no longer haunted by fear of hunters in the darkness, no longer forced to hide the remarkable strength growing steadily within him. The Alpha King had once lifted his cup for another woman, never knowing his true heir waited miles away with his true Luna. Now, standing together beneath a peaceful autumn moon, Damien understood completely that the family he had once carelessly rejected had finally, rightfully, come home to claim the place that had always belonged to them, and that nothing, not political pressure, not council resistance, not even his own past mistakes, would ever again convince him to release what he now recognized as the truest and most precious bond of his entire life.